Hi, Steven. Nice to have you back on this video.
Always a pleasure. Thank you, G.
For those who don't know Steven, we have done already three videos with Steven. One about himself, one about resilience, and we have also done a video on Sony Pictures North Korean incident. So if you want to know more about him, please have a look at the videos in our overview. So today we are going to look into physical security. Sometimes we only think about cybersecurity as being the digital part or the IT part in some sense, but for all of us who have been working as a CISO responsible security, we know that the physical security is remaining a very important part. And we have the pleasure here to have Steve with us, and he has a lot of long years of experience in that area. Maybe you can say a few words about where you're coming from.
Well, thank you. I think this is really a timely conversation because physical security is so important today. And I've got literally decades of experience in a lot of different types of companies, in a lot of different locations around the world. And I think there's a real similarity to how you do it and how you not do it from a standpoint of the obligation of the employer to provide reasonably safe and secure work environments for their people, for their content, and for their assets. And this all comes under the umbrella of duty of care, right? We have a duty. When I employ you and I ask you to come to the workplace, you should be reasonably comfortable in the knowing that I'm going to provide a safe and secure work environment for you and the product that you work on, the end product, if you will. So I think companies today know that they need to do something. They may not know what they need to do and not do, and why it's so important. It leads to an access control. You always have a decision to make around who gets what level of access and why. And you've got to ask yourself that. You've got to have policies and procedures around that, so that you know who you're giving access to, because to me, access is everything. If you give it to the wrong individual, or you don't rescind it fast enough, or your controls on the premises aren't good enough, all of these can be problems. And today, with the insider threat being what it is, it's even more important. So I'll stop there, and we're going to talk with you about some do's and don'ts around good policy and bad policy.
Yeah, so we have divided this topic a bit between bad practices and the good practices, and to set up to describe what typically we have as a problem or where we have to do immediate actions. So maybe getting started on this, one important point is that we need to establish our starting point, where and many people may not have a starting point. So maybe you can explain a little bit what is the problem, or if you do not have a good starting point, you don't know what is missing or what you should be doing. Maybe you can say a few words about that.
I think what's important for all of us is that we know where we are. By knowing where you are, you also then determine what your gaps are. And that's where you can, apply a continuous improvement model to make it better. And you should always be looking at making it better, assuming that it all works. That's another issue. Having a risk assessment done that looks at what's your potential risk, what's your potential threat, what's the likelihood of occurrence, what safeguards do you have in place to not only prevent it from happening, but to respond to it if it does happen. And this includes physical security controls, cameras, alarm systems, access control, turnstiles. All types of things that you may institute and apply in a workplace are ways of controlling access. And we're not going to talk today about IT, but there's digital access as well as physical access. And I think a lot of the similarities are there. The right policy, the right safeguards, the right granting of access, whether or not it's digital or physical. But you need to know who's on your property, why they're there, what they're doing. So whether if it's an employee, okay, they know their job, they know where they can go and not go and so on. But if it's a visitor, we're going to get into that. that's another topic.
I totally agree with you. And we need to look what could potentially happen. What are the threats we're exposed to? But of course, we may already have lots of things in place, so we have that will limit the risk related to those potential risks or the or threats. And then, but we have a residual risk when we take the difference between those two, and that may be higher than what is acceptable to yourself as a security officer, to maybe the CISO, to the management at large, and every company being very different. That is probably the starting point. I think I would even add, if you do not feel having enough expertise in that area, sometimes it helps to have an expert in some ways, which may work a day or two on your premises or more, depending how big it is, help you to get started, because the better that assessment is, the better you get going, and their expertise will be a benefit to you. The other one is obviously, one big point is, you have a facility, you have a parameter, there is you may have many entry points. So any bad practices on the entry points which you see?
Well, there's a show that's been on TV for years called The Weakest Link. And that's really what you have to consider, is you may have done a great job at your front entrance of controlling access. But what about the goods in and goods out, the side doors, the back doors, the loading ramps, people that work in the building that are not employees, but they're contracted to perform certain duties? What level of access do they have? If you're going to secure a property, it doesn't always have to be done physically with guards. It can be done with cameras, with audio communication with a guest, as an example. They don't need to talk to a body necessarily. You've got to look at it all. And you said it. Maybe you bring in a third party and have them take a look and make some recommendations to you about where your vulnerabilities are, where your gaps are, so that at least you can make a good decision around, do you care? Do you want to do something about that? Would it be efficient enough to just put a lock on the door, or to have the ability to unlock that door during certain peak times, or however you want to do it? There's a lot of different ways today with technology that you can better safeguard the premise.
Obviously, one aspect of this assessment is to look at, where your entry point is, and the bad practice is you don't secure those entry points, whatever way. I mean, your risk level, depending on risk level you want to take, you may secure them one way or another, but you have to know where are the entry points, and you have to make a decision for each of them. What is the level of security you want?
And on that point, we tend to think about physical security as the external ways of accessing the property, but there's another part to this. And that is that not everybody who's granted access inside the building needs to be able to go everywhere in the building. There are areas that you're going to want to section off and have another layer of access control. And all the time, the thing you have to consider is you can't trap people. You've got to have exit strategy and policy and awareness for your employee base on where they should go and what they should do in the event of a fire, of smoke in the office, of an earthquake, or whatever it may be.
No electricity, therefore certain things may not work.
Typically with alarm systems and door locks and that type of thing, everything opens up in the event of an emergency, because you got to get people out. So that's a factor that you must consider.
So you have to secure people coming in, or be clear on that, have a secure entry points, and have a safe way out in case of any emergency.
Clearly marked exit procedures.
Maybe the next point is, you mentioned it already, in some cases you only put cameras on certain places, and camera is a big thing in physical security, but I think there's also a few bad practices which I can still see. Can you comment a bit about that?
In my last employer, I think at one point we had 2,500 cameras from all over the world. There is no individual or group of individuals that can possibly monitor all the activity on all the cameras at all times. Impossible. So when you buy or install a camera for typically for access control, there's got to be a way to manage it. So you can buy motion sensing cameras, infrared as an example, with a motion sensor, with an intercom that if something happens and somebody needs to connect with someone else or ask a question, that you have an ability to do that. The other thing about this is that oftentimes cameras, the way they become valuable is after the fact. So the data that's on the camera, that it sees, that it records, you want to save that for at least 30 days because you don't know at the time that you had a problem.
The bad practice is simply you don't keep it. You just see it at the moment that you don't record anything until you cannot come back when something happened and you cannot even go back when to check it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean the value of it is that it's there for 30 days and at some point you may need to go back and take a look. But you can also use it if you wanted to do data analytics, traffic patterns, for example. What are the peak times? Maybe you had a breach and you want to go back and look at how did that happen? Did somebody allow tailgating, right? As an example. So they have great value in the content, but perhaps not always at the time.
I had I came across in my practice cases where even in data centers, some people had low resolution cameras. All they could see is whether there was a fire in the data center or was a door was open, but they couldn't identify anybody actually on the camera. So if you have to, you can't recognize it's a friend or is a friendly or not friendly or an employee or anybody, or especially even within your 30 days, you couldn't go back and say, can I use it as evidence? Can I recognize anything on anybody? Even though today high resolution cameras are not necessarily expensive anymore, still we see a number of older ones around, and I think it's a wrong place to save money in physical security.
I'm glad you brought that up. I think it's really important. The time that you most need a good image is when you've had a problem. And if you've got legacy cameras that have not been patched and updated and or you've got low resolution versus high resolution, the question you should ask is, why do I have that? What value does it have to me? And really, like you said, Dee, it's so cheap today, not only to acquire higher resolution capability, but also to store it. Storage is cheap. And if you can't afford, whatever, I said save it for 30 days. Save it for 20 days. Maybe that makes a difference but I wouldn't recommend it. I would still stick with 30, but you have to do what you can do.
I think even as we go forward, and we'll see that when we do the best practices, I can imagine the future even you may have AI coming in either for the data protection side or coming in from actually recognizing certain questionable situations, because you have many cameras, you may have to monitor those or go back and find a questionable situation. I hope now that AI is actually getting into pictures, getting into video, that will help the physical security team to do a good job, and then having the storage in digital format in a good way is great. But so we have already covered the securing of the entry points. We have covered the cameras. Let's go maybe another very important topic is of course, everything these days in most companies, maybe on the movies we see fingerprints and eye scans, but most companies would use access cards. And on the access card, there are lots of bad practices. So maybe you can share a few insights to those.
Yeah, I think in an ideal world, companies should have policies around who gets an access card, why they get it, what it authorizes and does not authorize them in the way of access. Maybe, for example, if I work Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., I don't need to be able to get into that facility on the weekend. Unless there's an emergency, then I should have a number I can call to get me an exception to access control policy. I think those controls can be very good. You don't want people wandering around your property after hours. You don't know what they're up to, so don't allow it. Another thing is, in the design of the access control card, you may want one color for employees. You may want another color for visitors that are readily identifiable to everyone. And it's everyone's job to safeguard that work environment. So if you see somebody in there that's walking around that doesn't have a card, or maybe they've got a red card if that's a visitor, and they're unescorted, then you ask them, "Can I help you?" And I think it's incumbent on all of us to do a better job with controls. The other thing, oftentimes, I know more so in Europe perhaps than other parts of the world, having that badge, Asia as well, I guess I would say, having that badge, and let's say that it's, you work for Sony. That's kind of prestigious. I work for Sony, and it says right on my badge, Sony, and here's my photograph. And on the back side is information that relates to my work or my identity or whatever, maybe a barcode, whatever. But my view is that you're probably better off having a policy that says you do not put the name of the company on the card. And the reason is, if the card is lost, and that oftentimes happens, then anybody can grab that card and use it to gain access to the property, and you don't even know until it's too late that you've got a breach. So I think you're better off not having the name of the company on the card. You can have a phone number that they could call to report a lost card if they would. Otherwise, don't go there.
And I think also one problem is when people lose cards, and sometimes we quickly make a second card or a new card, and maybe the old one is still not disabled completely, and suddenly we have multiple cards. There's 3-4 cards per person available. You lose control anymore because you don't know if this is still in the control of that person or someone else is manipulating it. I think the other one is I think there is certainly the issue of convenience here. So like in the duplication of the cards, it's convenience versus security. There's another convenience part which I've seen is people who give access to give to their third parties. And I know one case of an electrical maintenance company on several buildings. They wanted to make it easy for this company to come and help, so they give access to every engineer in that company. So every engineer could come at any time to any building. That was a practical solution to getting problems fixed in the electricity. But at the end of the day, you don't know anymore who has that card, and maybe they have replacement or other people, they share it amongst themselves. You lose totally view, and then you have suddenly your employees plus another hundreds of thousands of cards circulating around with third parties, and you lose total control.
I'm glad you brought that up. Your policy should prohibit the sharing of cards. So each card that's issued should have its own identity for that individual, period. You don't loan your card. You don't allow tailgating. That card says you are granted this level of access, and we want to know when you use your card. And another thing I'll tell you about, in crisis situations where, let's say there's an earthquake in a building and you've got 3,000 employees there and guests, you need to know who's in the building and who isn't. So if you have a good access control database, you can readily pull that information up, including visitors.
Particularly, we're going to talk about incident response in a moment, but we also know that there is the emerging importance of resilience in that area, where suddenly we have to take into account, a more disastrous situation happening, which possibly people are injured, and we have to know who is okay, who is not okay, who was there, who wasn't there. So it is getting very important. I think the last thing I want to say about cards, I have also come across cases where the cards were easy to copy. You just go to a shopping mall and you copy the card. So obviously there's still those around. I think nobody should use any card for physical security, which can be easily copied, but they're still around because they still function, but they are not secure. Again, the cards have become a lot cheaper. I think the readers also, I think that is also not something we should be continuing. Maybe moving to the next topic, and you mentioned that already. You had before, even globally, but even I think on the major side, hundreds of camera, even globally, 2,500 cameras, but maybe on the major sites, hundreds of camera. And how do you actually do the surveillance? How do you keep an eye on that? And you have to think about when you install cameras, maybe how to manage that. Any comment on that?
Well, I think with cameras, there are times when it's better to have a security officer or a person helping you with the access control. It can be front of house, it can be greeting a visitor. So, visitor management doesn't have to be done necessarily by security. You give them the tools that they need to do it, that's fine. The other thing about cameras, there are times when you're going to want to pay more attention to what the camera is seeing. And many of the cameras today have pan, tilt, and zoom. So you can pan an area, you can set it up so it automatically does it. You can tilt it up and down, or you can zoom in. And a trained operator should be able to do that and use it in a way that creates a great deal of efficiency from a standpoint of further safeguarding. For example, 10 o'clock at night, parking garage, dark, employees working late, having to walk to their vehicle, unescorted. If they could call the crisis or your control center and say, "Hey, I'm getting off shift. I'm going to be walking in this parking garage A to the second level to get my vehicle. Could you use the camera system to monitor me so I'm safe?" Sure, you can use this as a benefit to your employee base that further assures them they're going to be safe. It's not just to catch a bad guy.
I think maybe a topic which is related to cameras and also to other devices, used to control physical security. I think the other one is we have to make sure that they all work in the proper way and that things are in a good state. Maybe you can say a few words of that, because if we just have a camera and it doesn't work, it's a problem. But so there's a whole, I guess, process to be put in place to make sure that that is working. So not maintaining the cameras, not updating them because they're now digital devices, not patching them maybe even because they are now IoT devices or something like that, will not only not do the physical security job, but someone actually could get into the company.
You mentioned IoT. Let me comment on that a minute. Today, I think there are billions of IoT devices, and tomorrow there'll be billions more. And we buy them because they're cheap and off the shelf, and maybe it's to monitor what your newborn baby does in their crib at night. You have audio and video, and you can even record it. And you can do it if you're away from home. You can look on the camera on your phone. I mean, there's all kinds of technologies. The problem with the IoT devices typically is they come with simple default passwords that everybody knows, and anybody can breach it. And the other problem is you're plugging them into your network. So at work, let's talk about work. At work, you should have stringent policy that says nothing can be plugged into the network without previously being reviewed and approved, including all IoT devices. And then if you do have IoT devices on your network, somebody needs to go back and look at the default passwords. And I can tell you there's been major hacks, including a big casino in Vegas, where the bad guys got in and did a lot of damage, a ransomware attack. And that's how they got into the network, was through an IoT monitoring device. So I think that's important. The other thing is that if you're going to put the time and effort into this, make sure that they work. So every so often, like fire extinguishers, every 30 days, and I had hundreds of them at my last employer, every 30 days, every fire extinguisher was checked and signed off. Same with the cameras. You have to do that. The other thing about it is you have to make sure that people know that when one of them is not working, you put in a work order and you get it fixed immediately. That is a priority. Otherwise, your whole system tends to collapse.
So I think a good point on the IoT side. I think we'll have a future video where we'll look on the technology revolution in some sense, which happened in physical security when we moved from analog to digital. In some ways, suddenly, we have fundamental questions. Does the physical security person become an IT manager? Does he have to become, or do we work with IT? What is the best way forward? Because suddenly we have a new problems to solve, and also a new organizational problem to solve. And I think it's fundamentally transforming in some sense. The fundamentals on risk management are still the same, but in terms of operations, new aspect of, or new discussion points. I think one point I would like to bring up is is about the incident response. And, what we have all these detection devices. We see immediately, or that something is going wrong. What are we going to do? And I think, are people really prepared, or is that they will improvise? What's your feeling? I think there's clearly, if you clearly a risk there.
The reason that people panic in a crisis is because they have no plan. And I think the key here is to, within reason, try to plan for what might happen, and then what are you going to do about it? So are you going to escalate? Are you going to notify? Are you going to summon the police? Are you going to evacuate? All of these things. That's critical. You must know what you're going to do. So I'm a big advocate of that. Whether you're responding to an incident on a camera, an access control alarm, whatever it may be, you've got to have a plan around it. So think about what might happen. Think about how you're going to respond and who. And the other part of it is you can't respond to everything. So what is an incident? You have to define and understand what an incident is, and then how you might respond to it. A lot of the things that happen don't require much in the way of response. It's maybe good to know, you document it and you move on. It doesn't have any impact. But other things that happen, you can't ignore. They may have an impact. And so who do you need to have check it out, if you will, and then report back, and then make a determination on next steps. What are you going to do about it? So I think it's all in the planning, really.
And I think package that planning is to also, which is typical for incident response or incident management, is you have to have a way to triage things, because you may see lots of false positives. And, if you cannot run every minute, every direction. So it's important that you mature your processes and your setups in a way to minimize those false positives. So otherwise people get, tired of alerts every 2 minutes. I guess.
That's exactly right. You get burnt out on it. Good point.
I think maybe adding, or a little bit, not really in the typical incident response, but part of the whole setup is, it's not only the physical security people who have to do a job, but I think it's all staff or all employees must know what they have to do. Or so can you say a few words about preparation the risk is there's no preparation. You just have cameras, and then we improvise when things are happening, and employees have no idea what they should do in what situation. They're not part of your physical security plan.
I think that the best programs inform and engage the workforce. Every employee has a role and a responsibility, and they'll do it if you help them understand why it's important and what it is you want them to do. They'll help you. So, like I mentioned earlier, seeing someone in the workplace, on the premises, that doesn't look like they belong, or looks like they're lost, or maybe worse, how do you approach that individual? And who approaches them? What do you do about that? So I think it's really important to take that approach. But it's also then equally important to better define roles and responsibilities. So who is it that's going to do what, when, and where? And people need to know what their jobs are. And part of the reason that's so important is I can't have three people who all think that it's their job and that they should all respond to it. And then they get into a conflict with each other about, no, that's my job. No, that's my job. You don't want that. You want it really clearly defined for everybody and have everybody be aware of what each other's duties and responsibilities are. So, like they say, safety in the workplace, that's everybody's responsibility. So is security, right? And we just need to do a better job of communicating that. And I think we have huge value in the fact that we have people in the workforce who are there, who are able to help us.
I think a little bit extending that, and I think we're coming to the end of this video, is we should raise awareness. We should train employees, and they should know what to do and why they're doing it or should be doing it. I think also we have a few third parties. I was always amazed that after 6 o'clock in the evening, the building is taken over by the cleaning company. Yeah. And then, it's a different world altogether. And, when I was investigating insider risk, you can easily put all kinds of devices on your internal network. You spend all this money to prevent people from coming in your company, but, you could be exposed heavily by someone bringing in with the cleaning team all kinds of recording devices, key loggers, anything. So I think when you make training and awareness and the concept, I think at least a number of key third parties must be included on this. Any other thoughts on this topic?
If you've got a large property, it's very difficult to have someone be an escort for the cleaning service all night, assuming they clean at night. However, you can identify areas where there's more likely to be a threat or a risk. For example, C-suite offices, right? They should have an escort there. And maybe what I used to do, I would have them come in and clean my office before I went home. Because when I left, I locked it down. And that always worked for me. I never needed an escort in my area. Not everybody could do that. So, and it doesn't mean, by the way, that the cleaning crew are bad people. They're not. Typically, they're really good, hard workers, just doing a job. But whether it's the cleaning crew or the electrical contractors or whoever it may be, again, I go back to the importance of knowing who's on the property and making sure that they are where they belong and that they are not where they don't belong. Just controlling it better. Those are a couple thoughts.
Well, I think that should be. We could go on for a little while, but I think we have covered the main points here. And as hopefully everybody can see or hear from this presentation, it's a very vast topic. It's modernized by technology, and it's more relevant than ever. And we have more possibilities today. And I think hopefully our advice in this video and one of the others more to come will help you to modernize your setup, and it will be it'll be an important part to protect you from outside risks, and maybe your first line of defense, and hopefully also help you in case of disaster, have evacuate people, find people, and so on. So it's really a tight, very close way to the whole area of resilience. And just to remind everybody, we have done a video on the resilience. If you're interested in that topic, there's a lot more to be said. So thank you very much, Steven. Any last minute comment? But certainly looking forward to do also, I think, a little bit more an in-depth video on one or two topics related to physical security.
No, I think it's really good that you've included this because it's important. It's kind of like a first line of defense, really. Physical security is. Today, more and more assets are digitized, and of course we have to protect those and safeguard those as well, in different ways. But this is the first step. It's a big step. I go back to what I said. Every employer has a duty of care.
Thank you so much. And thanks for sharing all these insights, and really looking forward to the next video. And if you have watched this video and you had other views or other situations which are important, or you would like to share with the audience, please do not hesitate to also put the comments on this video. I think, there's a quite enormous diversity of situations out there. And while we try to stay mainstream, there may be special situations which are important to you. Please share this with anybody. There may be even incidents you want to share. I think we can only learn from the art of the possible, I should say. So don't hesitate to comment on this. Also, if you agree with the views expressed here, please do so. It's our pleasure to engage with you. So thank you very much for listening to this and commenting, and looking forward to the next video on this topic. Thank you so much. Thank you, Steven.